All right, welcome, Naeem. Great to have you here for the going over your sessions for our Hellfire project, looking at the Council of Nine. And I'm going to go read your bio here. Naeem is an audio visual artist and remote viewer from the greater Toronto area. He's been studying remote viewing since 2011. His YouTube channel has become one of the top resources on the internet for remote viewing performed live on camera, with 150 RV-related videos. He currently works with Crypto Viewing, a multidisciplinary group accurately forecasting cryptos and events with military-grade remote viewing.
So this is the first isolation of a gestalt to see, what I can see there. And looking at the air, I get this very Saturn-like shape. I've got the sense that this feels artificial. Buzzing sound, high-pitched sound coming from there. And I get the sense of something, there's some transport or something's being carried around here. I get the sense of encapsulate.
I guess I should interject that, one of the things I was expecting is that at least one of our viewers would pick up on some type of Saturn-related data, as in the Law 1 channelings, they say that the Council of Nine, their headquarters are sort of in the rings of Saturn on some dimension or other. So, when I saw your drawing there, that was kind of like a little, fist pump.
Yeah, the thing is with some of these, sometimes when I do remote viewing, it's like the visual is so this one was very brief and very fast, and I wasn't expecting to see a planet, but my first impression when I saw this is that Saturn, you know what I mean? But it's like you kind of don't want to go there that fast. This is like the first thing I'm looking at, so I left the Saturn. I tried to keep that idea out that it's Saturn there, but
right.
Yeah. So looking at water, a water aspect, I saw something moving around in the liquid, almost like like a water creature or something, something in the water moving around, sloshing, putrid smells. And the idea that I get when I probe this is that this is like being watched. It's like a test subject, and its performance is being kind of tracked or watched. Yeah, kind of a test subject.
Mm-hmm. It looked like your initial drawing of life forms a few pages up. It also had a similar sort of, it looked like somebody in some kind of liquid or something sloshing around, almost had a test subject looking vibe. Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And some yelling and screaming data there, which
yeah. So test subject feel not good. Yeah,
it doesn't seem like he's enjoying the process.
Yeah, not something fun here. Structure one. One of the challenges with seeing some of this stuff sometimes is the scale, kind of understanding the scale of what something is if there's nothing to compare it to. So, I see this. I'm not sure if this is something very large or if this is something very small at this point when I'm looking at this. But what it looks like is like two 90-degree-ish structures, and it's going beneath the surface. So this could be land, or this could be someone's skin. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the sense of almost like two clamps or two 90-degree things there going down, and I get the sense of a deep probe, something artificial. Probe, measure, sample, retrieve, almost like a pipeline. Wet and mushy, slimy. So this was this is when I'm trying to look at life now, because I had so many I had life forms. Some were just kind of standing there, some had their arms raised. So I'm looking at life multi here. I know there's some life I have to see. So I saw a bunch of people, or life forms standing on almost like around the rim of a structure. And the first impression I get is they feel like scientists. They feel detached. So solemn type of emotion here. So they're not whatever they're overlooking, or whatever they're doing, they're detached from it. So I'm trying to probe for what are their motives, what are they interested in here. And I get recombinant, and we were talking about that word, what is that word, and it has something to do with DNA or genetics or something like that.
I remember I think I sent you a little email saying
Yeah.
asking you what the word was, and I think you had written back that you actually ended up looking it up.
Yeah, it says an organism's cell or virus in which genetic recombination has taken place.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, a material produced by genetic engineering. So yeah, so doing something. I knew it had something to do with that, kind of something to do with the body, recombinant, dither, overwatch, and observe. I just probing once there, I get the sense of a portal or a jump gate, and that's just like completely out of the blue there on that one. I almost didn't want to write that one down. You know what I mean? Calculations, diagrams, and then I get this like propulsion off world. Like this is not maybe not on Earth here in this physical reality. And then I get another kind of flash where it's like other people are there, some other people are sitting, and I still get the sense of like overlook and overwatch. And yeah, this one was kind of scary here.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't really look at these kind of targets that often, but I've seen a gray type creature before in a target we worked with crypto viewing. But this one, I don't think this one is a gray thing. This looked more like a mantis. Yeah, like a mantis, oval head, black eyes, a thin body, not speaking a normal language. And I get overlord, overwatch, secular observers. And then I'm probing them, I get a sense of like a paranoid reaction.
To your probe?
Yeah, probing on that. It's like not good. I saw this for like maybe like 2.5 seconds, and then it kind of just faded away. And that was like pretty, wasn't expecting that.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And at this point, like, yeah, like I wrote here, I'm looking again now, because now I'm just like, okay, I either just completely messed this up or I'm going somewhere with this, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm like, let me see if I could just get another visual that can, something that I missed, something that I need to see. And here I see at least 3 life forms there in a pretty tight space. A life standing in a small space, and there's also a bed there. And the probe here I get is like operation. So, and I get the sense that this is like subcraft in a lower, some type of lower area. And then I just wrote like, this is strange, I'll stop here. You know what I mean? It was like, I saw this, and I saw this, and right when I just, because it's gonna end it, and then all of a sudden I just see this like a mummy, like a body wrapped up in some kind of fabric, and I got like a wrapped up body. Is it mummified type vibe?
So what's your feelings after this first session? You walked away, just in general, like what vibe you were getting, or what were your emotional feelings about it?
It was like I had a feeling that it was probably on target, just because of what, the Hellfire in general. You know what I mean? Like if it wasn't Hellfire, then maybe I'd be like, I'm just gonna redo this.
Yeah.
But then I was like, okay, yeah, like I don't come up with stuff like that. Like whenever I bomb a set, when I do a session wrong, it's like I'm like describing something like a building. You know what I mean? Like I'm just completely like off. So it's like I was like, okay, then this might be something to it. Saw a mantid type thing, and then I'm seeing a bed, and I'm seeing a operation scenario. So I was like, yeah, like maybe because I'm not thinking those things, right? I'm not consciously thinking those things at that point in the session. So I felt all right about it. So I was just like, if there's something here, then we'll see if there's a retask.
Your first session was interesting for me because you had data that was like, yes, he's definitely on the target, that image of Saturn and just the general themes of your first session. There's also session data in there that I definitely didn't expect. Some of it, from a human vantage point, I would call like negative or disturbing. This idea of several times you had this concept of a test subject, and the test subject might have been screaming or yelling, and the operation table. Didn't expect any of that going into the session, and I was kind of like, what are we picking up here? Is there more to how the Council of Nine operates than I was expecting, and started wondering, well, are we viewing the Council of Nine's helpers? Like, is this like a multi-tiered kind of thing? And from our vantage point, maybe what they're doing is, like, well, we can talk about that more in terms of some of the more what we might consider negative data and get your perspective on that. As far as the retasking, for your next session, I asked you to get some more information about the image. It looks like Saturn, your air data, that object that has a Saturn shape. And then I asked you to probe your overseer data. I asked you to probe what these life forms might be observing and overwatching, as well as what they might be calculating and probing for activities and objectives of the life forms at the target. Also wanted you to probe some more about what might be moving around in the liquid, some of that test subject data, I believe. And then also, I think we were probing your structural data. You had that structural data of, and the words deep probe, measure, and sample. And I was wanting you to probe what might be being probed, measured, and sampled in your structure drawing there.
Yeah, this is it's interesting whenever I go back to a target, because like I saw the stuff and I draw the stuff, but you only see it for such a brief moment, and it's not like it's kind of hard to say. It's like sometimes I draw something good, but I still don't really fully understand what it was. You know what I mean? Like I drew it, but I still don't know what it was. And then sometimes when I work a target again, it's like, okay, you told me revisit this or that aspect. So when I'm revisiting it, it's like I still don't know what it is sometimes. You know what I mean? So I'll see something, and then it's like, oh, then I realize like what it actually is. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's when I know there's probably good remote viewing happening. It's like it doesn't end up being what I expected it to be.
You mean you get that aha when you get the feedback?
No, like
sessions.
Like for instance, like when we get to this structure, I'll show you what I mean.
Okay.
So yeah, here's the second session here. So I went back and trying to refocus on these areas. Visual ideograms. This one looked like it might have been a life. So yeah, so now I'm going back to Air 1, and so that was the Saturn shape thing. So I'm going back to this Gestalt Air 1 again, but this time when I look, I see something else. This looks more like like a craft or something like that. So that's what I mean sometimes by like I'm revisiting something, but I might see something different, or I might see something more specific. You know what I mean? It's like it's
still has a kind of a Saturn-y shape to it.
Yeah, or maybe this is in the rings of Saturn, maybe this is there. You know what I mean? It's like it's a part of this Gestalt somehow associated with the air Gestalt. This was like hover, transport, carrier, domicile, artificial, sense of like quantum leap or vortexual, transmit, like it ruptures or breaks through. I get like transient, and carrier craft was the probe on this. Telepathic consciousness interface. So that's an interesting kind of like a curve, flat on the bottom, curved on the top. Craft there.
And that's for your process. That's an image that popped into your mind for how long? Just a second? Just
like maybe like 3 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did a movement to inside. I was like, let's see inside. This was a big console that wraps around inside a structure, and there's at least 2 beings there. The first thing that I saw was they're like waving their hands around, almost like that movie Minority Report, when he's moving around the stuff on the screen.
All right. Yep.
So yeah, that's what it reminded me of. Like they were doing something like that. Like they weren't typing, or they weren't actually touching anything. Silicone, beeps and static. I get a sense of control panels, maps, coordinates, flashing lights and consoles, sterile smell, probing, what are these guys about here? I get like biotechnology, implants, the biosphere, high intelligence. And yeah, I wrote that they move their hands around to interact. And I get warp speed, interstellar warp. That's the word that came to me there. So that was a pretty interesting visual. So now this was the structure one, that thing that I saw that was a deep probe thing. And when I initially saw it, I thought maybe I was seeing something really big on the land, like kind of like a tube going underground. Like that's what I thought it could be. But going back when I looked at structure one this time, this was clear. Like this was like those clamps that they used to like pry open flesh. So this was kind of like shocking. I was like, this is what that was now.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't expecting that at all. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean by like, sometimes I can tell when it's good data, because it's like, even though I think I know what I was going to go look at, it's like, no, I didn't know what it actually was. Yeah.
Right.
And now I'm like seeing it clearly. I was like, this is like an opening in a body with the flesh is held open. And then I started probing here. I get like morbid blood, incision, suction, testing and samples, organs and implants. And I kept getting this sense that like, you know, they'll treat you like a lab rat, these guys. DNA coding and restructuring, playing God. I kept getting that. The concept of toying with life and modification of the biosphere. Measurements, cell counts, transmissibility, organs, immunities, blood plasma, inoculate, bioramifications is what I get in association with this visual here. So kind of took a jump there. The data kind of took a jump to like it went into a whole new area here.
Your DNA, you have DNA kind of coding data here in the second session and your first session. It definitely goes along with what some of our other viewers got. Demi, for example, did an interview with her yesterday, and a lot of DNA programming coding data to create something new in her data as well.
And it's interesting because some of the data points I had on this structure one still matches what's the data on the structure one I looked at initially. So even though I didn't know what it was initially, it's like some of the data that I said sample and retrieve there as well. So yeah, it's just interesting. I saw it from like kind of, I guess, two different perspectives there, but definitely got a better grasp on it.
Yeah, that is interesting. You have in your first session, you had probe, measure, sample.
Yeah.
Wishy, wet.
Yeah, exactly.
Another one you had.
So seeing that now, I was like, okay, so I'm supposed to look at the life next. So life multi, person on a bed there, like a gag in the mouth.
Yeah.
Pins and needles is like the first word that came to me there. Not good. Test subject strapped down, pain, almost unconscious, struggle, held down, testing for like thresholds of pain and durability. Like we would call this torture. Treated like a lab animal. Again, I get that comes to me again. Interspecies, abduction testing, compatibility, genetic mutation, morphology, reproduction. And for these life here, I get a sense of like drones. They're like order followers doing a medical inspection is what they would say. So yeah, that was the life. And now looking back at the water where we saw the splashing, the splashing thing moving around. So I guess this is associated with that somehow. I see like one of those tanks, those cylinder tanks from the movies there, where they would have just like a body just like floating in there. Modified organism, probiotics. It's like a green fluid in here, like amniotic fluid, a synthetic life. Yeah, synthetic life. Electrocharge, automation. It's like a Borg, like an animated life Borg. Synthetic, like 3D printed, but on a higher technology is the sense I get here. Like this is somehow been created, held in suspended animation, like a DNA replica. So yeah, that was super, not expecting that at all there, but it's pretty clear. I saw this, and while I was getting this data, like I keep getting this visual, I had to kind of go on another page and draw it here, but a pretty clear color image of a, I guess we call these like a gray type alien or something, in a green fluid.
Does that feel like the mantis character from the first session, or do you think that's a different life form?
I think this is different. Yeah, I think this one was different. The other one had a more sharp head. this look more like the ones that they show on like the History Channel or one of those documentaries. These are ones that they would show.
Yeah, more classic gray.
Yeah,
hair shaped.
And I think, you know, I had the word suspended animation there, and you know, I was like, okay, I got to look at, you know, this life more. What's going on with this? And here I see like rows of bodies here, and again, I get this word suspended animation, and this is like a storage facility. They got like ready to use, like clones basically. They can be activated. They're automatons, synthetic cyborgs, and there's a life there. There's like a caretaker, a keeper, and I get like bioengineers, something to do with transmutation. And I think Dennis had the word suspended animation as well in his session. I saw one.
Yeah, he actually had a drawing that, and I didn't even connect this, but thank you for bringing that up. He has a drawing that is very similar to this one on the screen, and he AOL'd it as like I think it's called foosball table, where you got those little soccer player dudes, and you can swing the, and I mean, I can totally see that. It looks like 2 rows of foosball players. And then he probed it, and like you said, he got the same thing of, I can't remember what exactly he said, but it was like a pods or something suspended, something like that.
So that was looking at, so when I saw his session and saw that same word there, I was like, wow, that's always really interesting when doing remote viewing. This was bizarre. Like I couldn't make this up if I, you know, my wildest dream. So I'm just kind of just going with the flow here. I'm just like, okay, what else? Because it seemed like there was so much data for this target. So I was like, what's next? This was inside of a structure, like a warehouse kind of feel, and there's just like bodies that are kind of like propped up like mannequins. And I wrote like, this is strange. This is an area where there are different bodies and body forms on display, almost like a shopping mall, but for bodies. Like you would come here and it has like it would like list the specifications and the abilities, like, oh, this one can live for this long, and it you know, it's this intelligent, like this is like boasting, like on display, features and abilities, compatibility, longevity. But I get the sense of like boasting, like this is like a showroom. Like you would come here and they'd be like, we made this one, this was our best one. So that was just weird.
Yes.
This one was pretty strange too. These guys that are doing all the high level stuff, they seem to be small, or either maybe this being over here is huge, but these guys seem like they're on the smaller side. A body hooked up to a computer, and I get a sense of programming and installation. So this guy's like basically like a computer programmer, and they're feeding this into his body. And I get a sense that it's like flashing the BIOS, and then I get biosphere. I thought that was interesting, because biosphere, biological digital encoding is the kind of like the name I get. And then the council, the overseer type beings, probing more into that. You know, these guys just felt bizarre to me, non-human. I wrote scientific, detached. They're watching. They're doing calculations. I get like on durability, longevity, sexual ability, conductivity, organ placement, blood flow, ability to react, the self-awareness, the ability to comprehend. They're observing life processes, the viability, whether, you know, they're prone to death, ability to survive, communication, receptiveness, biological endurance, genetic ability, and their DNA sequence. So that's, I guess, the whole like playing God thing. These guys are keeping all these things and considering them in some kind of calculations there. So
yeah, which seems to result in some type of a body which ends up being on display with these different features that they appear to be engineering in some fashion.
And that's if I don't remember which books it's in, which number of the Law of One, but there's sometimes when they ask them some questions like, oh, you know, like what is Bigfoot, or who were the pre-humans and stuff like that, it sounds like they kind of get into some of this kind of stuff, like, you know, like, this was created, we created this, or we created that. So it's like, yeah, that's
They do talk about that. They talk about that in terms of moving planetary races from one planet to the other. Mars comes to mind. They talk about how in some way Mars became uninhabitable, but the people that were there hadn't completed their evolutionary journey on a third density planet. So in order to continue their learning, they had to go to a different planet, which turned out to be Earth. But Earth bodies, or the Mars, they need a different body basically, and I can't remember how specific that they get into it, but you're right. There's some kind of body would need to have been tweaked in order for them to exist on Mars, and I think they imply that there was a blend of Mars DNA or the Mars body with perhaps whatever animals or life forms are living on Earth at that time. Maybe a little quote unquote alien DNA thrown in there. I don't remember the specifics, but that's a good call out.
In the briefing for the landing on planet Earth, a lot of the implants and stuff, like they're getting some of the people there in that group and like saying, oh, we put something in you, or we put a thing in you. So it's kind of interesting with some of the data that I had here, the kind of the I guess the abduction scenario or the implants type thing, because that's the part that's kind of baffling. It's like these are some kind of interdimensional beings or something, or or aliens, or however you want to look at it, but they seem to still have to kind of like put something inside of you, you know what I mean? Like they're putting these little chips or these little things inside of you. So it's like, it's just so bizarre.
And they're actually merging from higher to lower, and maybe that technology is a part of what bridges that gap, or can bridge that gap in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
For communication, or who knows what else.
But definitely from this perspective, like in the channelings, like one thing I did find weird when I initially was reading them, and even still in the more recent books about it, is the idea that it's like this thing, the way they say, oh, this instrument is running low on energy, or you know what I mean, that way they talk about the person being used as the channel, that always was a little bit of a red flag in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, that just seems like such a non-human way to talk about the being, you know what I mean? It would be like, yeah, this instrument is
right,
we're having trouble with this instrument. So it's like, that seems like
clinical.
Yeah, it's like, well, looking at my data here, like they'll treat you like a lab animal, that kind of thing. They're kind of detached. Like that seems to line up. It's like, yeah, you're just an instrument. Like they always say things like, the bandwidth we're working with is low here. Like, you know what I mean? We have a small bandwidth to connect with the instrument and stuff like that. So that, seems such like a technical way of electronic way of talking about it. It's like, yeah, maybe they are like punching something into a computer somewhere,
Yeah, but the law of one material, when I read it, sometimes I feel like I'm listening to the musings of some type of a robot, or like a computer, like AI or something.
Yeah.
But then other times, Ra, who's the group of beings that in the law of one material they're communicating with, sometimes it turns into some very beautiful and poetic, heartfelt text, or in the channeling, lost for words there. But yeah, so there's an interesting combination of that kind of clinical, kind of almost computer, or kind of like language, but then there's some interesting, almost poetic language as well. So I don't know what to quite make of that either.
Yeah, and there's so many times where they make like mistakes.
With like the timeline and that kind of
stuff.
Yeah,
they'll say something and they'll be like, oh, there's a correction, like that was wrong what we said then, it's actually this. So it's like that part of it, it makes it seem a little more, I guess, authentic. If those are real beings, then it would be like, yeah, I guess they can still make mistakes, even though, you know what I mean, they're trying to translate this information somehow, you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like if it was not real to an extent, why would they do that? That would just discredit them, you know what I mean? You're
right.
You're apparently, making a connection with some humans, and it's this rare communication, and then you're making these mistakes, you know what I mean?
Well, they're honest about it, right? So that could lead some, at least you're dealing with beings that have some level of integrity. They'll admit when they make the mistake, which isn't a bad thing. I wanted to read your last page that you wrote for session 2, just to complete the information. You wrote that this gives me the creeps, understandably. Borg clone synthetic life creation.
Yeah.
These will treat you like a lab animal, only interested in the data. Very businesslike. Create the artificial spark of life, playing God. Testing to see if it withstands pain, survive, like product testing, but on life forms. Yeah. They don't seem to care much about what happens to any individual one. They can make new ones. Biological engineering, manufacture. Wow. Yeah. So going back to what I was saying earlier, when I was going through your data, and you're right, it kind of gave me the creeps too. I mean, would you, the life forms that you view, do you think you'd want to be hanging out with them and spending time, or they kind of?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like it, I get, listening to, even like I said, even when I listened to or read those channelings and stuff, a part of it did creep me out a bit, just the way they, if they are that different, yeah, you can't really expect them to have the same kind of emotional capacity that we have, because like they would ask questions like, oh, why did this tragedy happen, or these people died, and they're just kind of like, oh, well, it's all just, that whole higher level perspective, like, what I mean, like, oh, it's just a part of their life plan, or what I mean, it's like,
yeah,
yeah, they're not really affected by the idea that a bunch of people die.
Oh, right, thank you. Don't worry, I'm not going to say Illuminati. Yeah. The point is, from that image and what Lynn was talking about with Wallace's interpretation of this symbol, and what Edgar Cayce said, is that these kind of things do have political connotations, political implications. But Lynn and I were interested when Henry Wallace's name came up in connection with Edgar Cayce, because we knew about him in another context. Henry Wallace, as Lynn said, was President Roosevelt's vice president during Roosevelt's second term, so it's 1940 to 44. He was actually a member of Roosevelt's cabinet throughout Roosevelt's presidency, and it was during that period that he did the dollar bill thing. But of course, Wallace narrowly lost the vice presidential nomination to Harry Truman when Roosevelt went for a third term, and of course, if he hadn't lost that nomination and been vice president, he would have actually become president when Roosevelt died in office in 1945. But as I say, we knew about him in another context, because in the late 1940s and early 50s, Henry Wallace funded an interesting setup in the state of Maine called the Round Table Foundation. And this is a picture of where it was based in Maine. I should actually say partly funded, but I'll come back to that. Now, the Round Table Foundation was set up to conduct research into parapsychology. And it was the idea of this guy, who's a medical doctor named Andrija Puharich. And as I say, it was set up to do basically laboratory research into extrasensory perception and similar things. And also brought in some of the most famous mediums and psychics of the time. For example, the Irish medium Eileen Garrett and a Dutch clairvoyant who was very well known at the time called Peter Hurkos. So they were brought into the laboratory to be studied. But although the lab was kind of set up on scientific principles, it was, as Puharich acknowledged, very much based on and oriented towards the teachings of Alice Bouverie, who Lynn talked about earlier. A very influential New Age teacher. The Round Table Foundation was actually astonishingly well connected at the very top levels of American society, because not only did it have the patronage of a former vice president, it included members of some of the leading families, the richest families in the States. For example, this is a lady called Alice Bouverie, who was actually a member of the Astor family, a very, one of the great blue blood families of America. She was very involved in the Round Table Foundation's work. Another very key figure who helped Puharich set the place up and became kind of his second in command there was this guy, inventor and philosopher Arthur Young, who I'm sure many of you know about. Arthur Young was essentially the inventor of the Bell helicopter, and that invention had made him a fortune. And he used that fortune to pursue his own interest in spiritual philosophies and spiritual matters. And Arthur Young was actually married into the Forbes family, so again, one of the leading wealthiest families in the States. He was married to Ruth Forbes, who was also very involved in the foundation's work. Now, there are two ways of telling the next part of the story. But first of all, I'll tell it the way it's supposed to be told, if you like, the official version, the way the people involved wanted it to be told. And what happened was that in the end of 1952, the Round Table Foundation was working with another a psychic and mystic, an Indian named Dr. Ennead. And they brought him into the laboratory and were studying him. But one day he began to channel. And he began to channel two entities who said that they were actual representatives of what they called the Nine, or the Nine Principles, and sometimes the Nine Principles of God. A couple of significant points in the way these entities presented themselves through Ennead. I'm not making any kind of judgment on whether these entities were real or coming out of Ennead's subconscious. I'll talk about them as if they're what they claim to be. First of all, these two entities called themselves simply by initials. They called themselves R and M. Now, Alice Bailey, in her earlier teachings, had, from this entity that she called the Tibetan, had taught that when the New Age was about to happen, it would be heralded in by the appearance of two masters, and they were going to be called the Masters R and the Master M. So clearly there was a connection between Alice Bailey's teaching and what Ennead was channeling, and it would have been very obvious to Puharich and Arthur Young, who were very much into Alice Bailey. So that's one point. The second point is that the term Nine Principles has a particular significance in terms of the theories of Schwoloder-Lubitsch. As I'm sure everyone here will know, the ancient Egyptian religion of Heliopolis, the one which inspired the building of the Giza pyramids, centered on a group of 9 gods, which are known as the Great Ennead, group of 9, who are headed by the creator god Atum, and the other 8 gods, which includes familiar deities such as Isis and Osiris, are essentially seen as manifestations of Atum. Now, the ancient Egyptian word that is usually translated as God is Netta, but Schwoloder-Lubitsch translated it instead. He translated Netta as principle. And as far as we've been able to establish, he was the first person, and really in some ways the only person, to have done that. So these entities describing themselves as emissaries of the 9 principles, or the 9 principles of God, seems to be a specific reference not only to the Great Ennead of Heliopolis, but also to be specifically drawn from Schwoloder-Lubitsch's work. His work, in which he had that translation, incidentally, had been recently published just a couple of years earlier, although at that point they were only available in French. And then what happened is, for the next 6 months, until Dr. Ennead returned to India, I think regularly, once a week, a group was gathered, a group of 9 people, to hear the Nine's kind of wisdom being channeled through Ennead. This group obviously included Puharich and Arthur and Ruth Young and Alice Bouverie, possibly Henry Wallace, though we don't know for sure. Henry Wallace certainly visited the foundation, but the thing is, the identities of most of this group of 9 that met to listen to the channeling has always been kept secret. Similarly, what was actually said, very little of what was actually said during those sessions has ever been published. So, as I say, that went on for 6 months, just another kind of sitter group around a channeler, really. And then after that, the Round Table Foundation carried on its business until 1958, when its members, Puharich disbanded the organisation, and its members went their own separate ways. Throughout the 1960s, Puharich really had a double career. He was an inventor of medical devices, but he also established an international reputation as a parapsychologist, most famously studying a Brazilian psychic surgeon, Arrigo. But that was to pale into insignificance in 1971 because Puharich became the person who discovered Uri Geller. That's Puharich. You see, the 60s had happened to Puharich. He'd changed a bit. What happened was Puharich went to Tel Aviv in 1971 to evaluate Geller, and then he brought him back to the USA for testing at the California Research Institute called SRI International. But pretty much as soon as Puharich met Uri in Israel, he hypnotized him. And he hypnotized him in order to try and find out where Geller's abilities came from. And what happened was that when he put Geller into a hypnotic trance, Geller started to channel. He started to channel something he was called spectra, which claimed to be a conscious computer aboard a spaceship somewhere out in the cosmos. But Puharich, for some reason that's not really apparent, suggested that there might be a connection to the 9 principles he'd been in touch with 20 years before. And Spectra immediately agreed there was, and said it was actually the 9 who had programmed Uri Geller with his powers when Geller was a small child. And through Geller, the 9 alerted Puharich to what they said was his life's mission, which was to use Geller's talents to alert the world to an imminent mass landing of spaceships. That would bring representatives of the 9. But that didn't really work out, because after Geller was taken to the States and began appearing on the media and quickly became an international psychic superstar, in 1973 he bowed out of this, turned his back on it completely, and Puharich had to find other channels, which he did. He found a series of other psychics, none of whom lasted very long, before finally he settled on an American psychic and healer named Phyllis Schlemmer, and this is she. Phyllis Schlemmer had been a medium since she was a child, a kind of traditional spiritualist medium, and she had a spirit guide whose name was Tom, and she assumed this was the spirit of her deceased grandfather. But after she met Puharich and Puharich hypnotized her, Tom suddenly announced that he'd been an extraterrestrial all the time, and he was, of course, an emissary of the 9. So we can see a pattern here. Puharich would come across people who already claimed to be in contact with some kind of Discarna entity, hypnotize them, and suggest that their entity was really a messenger for the 9. And that suggestion would invariably be taken up. There are several other examples of him doing this with psychics. So it does raise the question of whether Puharich was actually stage managing the whole thing. Schlemmer wasn't the 9's only channel. There was a whole network of psychics in touch with them, but she was kind of the main one, the official one, what the 9 called their transceiver. And we basically had at that point what was a rerun of what had happened at the Round Table Foundation 20 years before. Puharich set up an establishment in Ossining, New York, that was called Lab 9, and gathered a group of people, disciples if you like, who would gather regularly to hear what Tom had to say through their transceiver. At this time, the 9 actually started calling themselves the Council of 9, which is the name by which they became best known in kind of New Age circles. And again, this group that was gathered around to listen to the channeling was a pretty impressive bunch. It included multi-millionaire businessmen, including members of Canada's richest family, the Bronfmans. It had members of European nobility. It had leading New Age and alternative writers, people like Lyle Watson. It had scientists from SRI International. At least one prominent political figure who was a personal friend of then President Gerald Ford, but whose name is kept out of the records. But even bigger than that, one of the members of this circle that used to sit and listen to the nine was Gene Roddenberry, creator, of course, of Star Trek. Another key player in Lab 9 was this guy, Dr. James J. Hurtak. James J. Hurtak, who I'm sure many of you know about, and probably actually some know. He was appointed by the Nine as Puharich's second in command, so a similar role to Arthur Young's in the earlier Round Table Foundation. Now, in fact, Hurtak claims to have been in independent contact with the Nine since 1973, when he says they programmed him with mystical awareness and incredible knowledge of the cosmos, all of which he put into a book, which is there, called The Keys of Enoch, or the Book of Knowledge, which, is a very kind of Bible-looking tome. But when you actually read The Keys of Enoch, it's very clear it owes a lot to Alice Bailey. It uses a lot of the concepts and the terminology and the kind of system of the way the universe is organised that came from Alice Bailey's writing. So it's essentially an update of Bailey with a bit more sciencey, really. But during the channeling sessions at Lab 9, this entity, Tom, in fact, in answer to a question by Gene Roddenberry, finally revealed his true identity and that of the Nine themselves. Tom claimed he was actually not Tom, but Atom, the creator god of the religion of Heliopolis, and the Nine were none other than the great Ennead of that religion. However, as we've seen, there were clues about this from the start, such as the use of Swallow-de-Lubitsch's term 9 principles, and certainly signs Puharich had known about this all along, right from the beginning. So what was the Nine's message as it emerged from their various channels? Well, it's they're advanced extraterrestrial beings or intelligences from Sirius, of course, who created the human species and had a profound influence on the origins of human civilization, in particular that of Egypt. They claimed a special association with Giza. According to Tom, there are secret chambers under the Giza pyramids that can be accessed from beneath the Sphinx. Obviously not the first to come out with that idea. They also say that the Nine have watched over humanity ever since, in particular guiding our religions. They claim to be behind all the world's religions except one, which I'll come to. And they say that this is a particularly critical moment in Earth's history, and they're about to return to put right what's gone wrong. And all of this is set against an apocalyptic background of a cosmic war between the forces of light and darkness. However, even with such impressive contacts, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, things didn't go that well for Lab 9. It broke up in 1978 after a series of unfortunate events that culminated in an arson attack on the Ossining estate. Puharich fled to Mexico, saying that his life was in danger from the CIA. He came back to the States 2 years later, saying he'd done some kind of deal with the CIA. And he doesn't seem to have played any further part in the Nine story from then until his death about 15 years later. But, so far it all seems very exciting, doesn't it? The gods of ancient Egypt, or the beings once worshipped as gods, our creators, our protectors, re-establishing contact, bringing revelations about our origins and our destiny. And initially, when Lynn and I began piecing this story together, that's what they thought. That's what we thought. Maybe something's really going on here. But the story I've just told you is the story as it was presented to the public through Puharich's books and works such as The Only Planet of Choice. The story of the Nine, the story as the Nine, or their human representatives, wanted it to be told. And as usual, Lynn and I looked behind the story, especially at the parts that we weren't being told. And what we found puts quite a different light on these events. The central figure in this drama was, of course, Puharich. Here he is back in the 1950s again. Throughout his career, he had very close links with the US military and intelligence community. He was actually got his medical training in the US Army, but was given a medical discharge in 1947, after which he established the Round Table Foundation. But the evidence is, I mean, very strong evidence, is that this medical discharge was really just a cover to allow him to set up what was an apparently civilian research institution where he could study individuals, mediums and psychics, who wouldn't have been comfortable being taken into a military facility to be put in one of their laboratories. Research, ours and that of other people, has established that in addition to private sponsorship by the likes of Henry Wallace, the Round Table Foundation was funded by the US Army. Also, the building and lands that it was in were actually given to Puharich by the US Navy. Even in his own account of events at the foundation, Puharich refers to visits by high-ranking army officers, specifically from the Army's psychological warfare section. More than that, right in the middle of those first contacts with the Nine, Puharich was redrafted into the Army. What happened was, in late 52, about a month before the first contact with the Nine, Puharich delivered a paper to the Pentagon. The paper was entitled An Evaluation of the Possible Usefulness of Extrasensory Perception in Psychological Warfare. And the very next day, after going to the Pentagon and delivering that paper, an order was signed redrafting him into the Army with the rank of captain. The fact he was redrafted gives the game away that his medical discharge some years earlier was just a cover story. So for the next 3 years, Puharich served at the US Army's Chemical Weapons Center in Maryland, which is that, continuing his work at the Round Table Foundation during his leave. And while he was away, it was Arthur Young who took over running the foundation and therefore running the 9 channeling sessions. The Chemical Weapons Center, where Puharich was stationed, wasn't only, as its name might suggest, concerned with chemical and biological warfare, but it was also the Army's main facility for psychological warfare. And that's what Puharich was working on. In particular, he was experimenting with, among other things, the effects of LSD, other hallucinogenic substances, particularly those used by Mexican shaman, which was part of a joint project between the Army and the CIA. And that project was in turn part of the CIA's notorious MK-Ultra program, its so-called mind control program. Now, all that puts a rather different complexion on the 9 contacts that Puharich was running at exactly the same time. Puharich's connections with the intelligence community continued after the 1950s. He was involved in the ESP research, which included remote viewing at SRI International, which it was later revealed was initiated and funded by the CIA, and it was the CIA who sent Puharich to Israel to evaluate Uri Geller and bring him back to SRI for testing. SRI crop up again and again in this story, sometimes in very unexpected places. SRI, Stanford Research Institute. It's a scientific research organisation that, from its establishment in the late 1960s, when it was basically spun out of Stanford University, has always been a major contractor to the US government and in particular to the US defence and intelligence agencies. So earlier I mentioned Puharich's apparent stage managing of the 9 contacts through hypnosis. So was the whole 9 thing, the whole Council of 9 thing, some kind of experiment by Puharich on behalf of the military and intelligence community? And if so, why? To what end? The story didn't end with Puharich. Phyllis Schlemmer continued channeling the 9 and continued until her death just 4 years ago. In 1992, a book of their channeling based on sessions from the 1950s onwards, called The Only Planet of Choice, came out and became a New Age bestseller. And as you can see, it has a front cover endorsement by James Hurtak. Hurtak himself went on to bigger and better things, travelling the world, giving workshops on his own book of inspired revelations, The Keys of Enoch, as he's still doing. And the nine, or rather those who claimed to represent them, continued to have a hotline to the top levels of American society and political establishment. Individuals connected with the circle around the nine even had some influence over Al Gore when he was vice president. And Al Gore, of course, nearly became president, a bit like Henry Wallace before. So maybe we should be grateful that George W. won the election in 2000. Only joking. So if the nine contacts were the result of some kind of manipulation, clearly that manipulation continued after Puharich left the scene. So maybe all that involvement of his with psychological warfare and agencies such as the CIA, was it just a coincidence, or did the nine choose to make contact with him because he had those connections? Well, it comes down to the question of whether the nine really were what they claimed to be, the gods of ancient Egypt. And sadly, perhaps, it seems they're not. The nine's knowledge of ancient Egypt seems to derive more from the works of Alice Bailey, Edgar Cayce and Schwaller de Lubitsch than it does from archaeology or Egyptology. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, of course, but the nine have made some very basic errors in their account of history. I don't have time to go into, but they're in the book, which really call their claims into question. A lot of what the nine said, particularly some of its kind of racial ideas and its religious ideas, are kind of quite worrying. For example, there's a distinct anti-Islamic theme in the nine material. Tom declared that the religion of Islam is under the influence of what he called the Fallen One, which is the leader of the cosmic forces of darkness. Hurtak's Keys of Enoch also labels Muslims children of darkness and speaks of the Kaaba stone in Mecca as being the embodiment of the universe's forces of negativity. All very worrying, particularly in today's world. And all the more worrying as from the late 70s, there was a real concerted, orchestrated effort which gathered momentum as the millennium approached to sell the nine and their message, both to powerful individuals and to a wider audience, using apparently independent discoveries, archaeological, historical and scientific, that appeared to back the nine's claims up. It's actually surprising how much in the alternative history field can be traced back to people who were part of that group around the nine. Earlier I talked about Arthur Young, Puharich's second in command at the Round Table Foundation, who, after that foundation was closed down, set up his own, the Foundation for the Study of Consciousness in Philadelphia. In the mid-1960s, Young became a mentor to a young student named Robert Temple, who actually became, at the age of 21, the secretary of Young's foundation. I'm sure everyone in this room will know who Robert Temple is, the author of the classic 1976 book, The Sirius Mystery. In some ways, the book that really started it all. It was actually Arthur Young who inspired Robert Temple to write that book. It was Young who in the mid-1960s first brought Temple's attention to the central mystery, the mystery of the Dogon of Mali and their apparently advanced information about the star Sirius, and who encouraged him to write it. So we have Arthur Young to thank for the Sirius Mystery, which is a book that seemed to provide independent academic support for Alice Bailey's channeled teachings about the influence of beings from Sirius on the human past, on the ancient past. But Arthur Young was a follower of Alice Bailey, so maybe it's not such a coincidence after all. James Hirk became a major player in events in the search for hidden chambers at Giza, particularly beneath the Sphinx from the mid-70s through to the 90s. In the 70s, working with a team from SRI International. Hirk's ideas came to influence writers such as Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. You'll find him referenced and quoted in them as an authority, without any mention that he claims to have a hotline to the gods of Egypt. This is Hirk and Robert Bauval at an event in California last year. Now, I've heard the bell, so I know that I'm running short of time, so I do have to skip the next bit, I'm afraid. It was also about how something else that was brought into this sort of unfolding drama in the 80s and 90s, the famous Face on Mars, all that can be traced back to people that were part of the Nine Circle. Hirk was a major player in publicising that, so I'm having to skip the detail here to keep to time. So basically we find all these different disparate strands of belief about the ancient past, and particularly its connection with places, extraterrestrial connections with places like Sirius and Mars, all seem to be drawn together more and more tightly as the millennium approached. And what seemed to us was that any discoveries that were being made were being spun, often quite shamelessly, to make them fit or appear to fit theories and pronouncements of people like Schwaller Lubitsch and Edgar Cayce. And we could, it seemed to us that a trail was being led that would ultimately lead people from those discoveries to the Nine, and therefore to those who claimed to be in touch with them and speak for them. That's what made Lynn and I want to write the Stargate Conspiracy, to bring the full story, including the hidden parts, to the attention of people who were getting excited by, for example, Hancock and Bauval's books. And we think that our book did its job, because by making these connections public, we kind of burst a bubble that was being built up, kind of took the wind out of our sails, because we could see that at some point, this was all heading towards a point where somebody was going to come out with a big reveal and say that this all proved what the Nine had been saying all along was true. Therefore, we should listen to the people that claim to speak for them. We don't think for a moment that's the end of it. Whoever was behind the Nine thing will be trying to find another way of using all that. And I just want to finish by summarising what Lynn and I are really saying and why we say it. Because after Andy asked us to speak today about Stargate Conspiracy, and as we were putting this talk together, we sort of joked between ourselves that our theme should really be, don't believe what you hear at conferences like this. Not even what we say. But no, that's not really what we're saying. The reason we got so concerned about the way these things were and are being manipulated is because we believe at least, that there are genuine mysteries about the ancient world and about the origins of civilization. And researchers like Andy and the others here today are right to be asking the questions and right to be trying to answer them. The danger, we think, comes when people pop up who claim they already have the answers because they've got them through their hotline to the gods. We weren't saying, and we're not saying, as some took it at the time, that all the evidence that conventional history is wrong has been invented in order to create this new belief system and to fool everybody. What we're saying is that all that evidence has been hijacked, it's been spun. Not just the evidence, but actually in some ways the gods of Egypt themselves have been hijacked. So, for example, just to give some examples, Robert Schoch's work on the water erosion of the Sphinx really does present evidence that the Sphinx is much older than the history books say. But, as Lynn said, it doesn't, as claimed by John Anthony West, prove Schwaller Lubitsch right either. Neither does it, as Graham Hancock tried to do in Fingerprints of the Gods, support Edgar Cayce's psychic information about Atlantis. Similarly, Robert Bauval's Orion-Giza correlation theory. The basic idea that the Giza pyramids were laid out to reflect the stars of Orion's belt hangs together, makes sense. What doesn't work is Robert Bauval's claim that the pyramids specifically represent Orion's belt as it appeared in 10,500 BC, and therefore supports Cayce's psychic information, because that is easily proven to be wrong. Neither do Lynn and I reject information that comes from channeling or other psychic means. Far from it. We've been around long enough to know better. We've known Andy far too long to think that. But information that comes through those means has to be tested just like any other source of information. Psychics can and do get things wrong. They are only human. And the sources of that channeled information, whatever they are, can and do mislead and manipulate. We shouldn't accept something just because it comes from an unseen source. What we're saying is that we should all be cautious when a message, spiritual, religious, and above all political, is attached to the wonders and mysteries of the ancient world. So I say we shouldn't believe something just because it comes through a psychic, just because it comes from an invisible source. Or for that matter, we shouldn't believe it even if it comes from what claims to be a god or the gods. As I say, we found discoveries that are genuine in themselves and genuinely intriguing and genuinely meaningful were being hijacked and turned to serve another agenda. So were the works of people like Edgar Cayce, or the psychic information of Edgar Cayce. They're all being forced to fit this agenda that supported the Nine. And the Egyptian gods themselves, as I said, have been hijacked as part of that process. And that was another thing that really motivated Lynn and I to write this book and to do this research, because we were really, one of the things that drove us is the way that the great Ennead and the religion of Heliopolis, which Lynn and I so respect, and in particular the wisdom of Heliopolis found in texts such as the Pyramid text, was being hijacked and used and abused. So I want to actually end with this image, which is an image of the real Nine. Thank you.